Let's go through there now.
They speak for up to 20 minutes each. Our first speaker, that's up to 20 minutes each. Our first speaker is Robert Malley, who's going to be on my left here, who's going to be... You can see that this is a very generous audience because you're clapping and nobody's even said anything yet, except introduction. Robert Malley is the Middle East Program Director of the International Crisis Group. And he knows a lot about the Arab-Israeli conflict because he was President Clinton's Special Assistant for Arab-Israeli Affairs. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in introducing the speakers because their bios are in your program notes. I just want to say if anybody hasn't read International Crisis Group reports, or if you don't know about them, you should, because they're very clear, very well documented, succinct analyses of what's going on. And many of the crises in the world that we live in are interrelated. So I'm really happy that we have Robert Malley here with us today. And Rob is said, is it okay if the panelists remain seated? Okay, good. It's easier for me to control them too.
Is this working? Yes. Good morning. I'm sorry that we're starting a little late, but I just can't believe it's a coincidence that we were moved to the Empire Room in this American Empire. What's happened to the Palestinian national movement over the last 40 years? Now, I could speak, we could all speak about what Israel has done to the Palestinian national movement, and I don't think most of you need to hear much more about that. We could talk about what the United States has done not to help the Palestinian national movement, but that wouldn't come as a surprise either. And I had prepared remarks on all of that, but frankly, I don't think you need to hear more of that. You know, this is a struggle between two national movements, the Palestinian national movement and the Zionist movement. And in a struggle like that, nobody's going to do the other one any favors. So the Palestinians would have been wrong, as the Israelis would have been wrong, to expect anything but what they've had from one another over the last 40 years. So I'm not interested so much in the wounds that the others have inflicted. What I want to talk a little bit about today, not forgetting your admonition to give you a ray of hope, which I will at the end, is about some of the self-inflicted wounds. Now the Palestinians have, and forgive me if I'm going to be a little bit abstract here, but they really confront a challenge that is quite unique. I'm a student of national liberation movements in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. I don't think there's anyone quite like this one. It's not quite a colonial situation, although there are obviously aspects of it. But it is a case of occupation. It's not a case like South Africa, where the Palestinians are saying, although they had at one point, that they want to live side by side in a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-confessional system. It is a unique situation of a national liberation movement that is fighting alongside or next to the state that it says it is prepared to see living peacefully. And that has faced odds that are quite unique, again, to any other movement I know. First of all, it's a place that is geographically divided between the West Bank and Gaza, at least since 1967. Divided by clan, family, geography, ideology. Divided too because it's a population in exile. About half the population lives away from its original place of birth. Many outside the geographic land of Israel-Palestine. It's an entity that has to struggle with outside interference from the very beginning, whether it's Arabs who have tried to dominate the Palestinian national movement, whether it's Europeans that have tried to do one thing or another to it, whether it's the United States, whether it's Israel. Again, a confluence of circumstances that I don't think can have any replica anywhere else in the world. Now, what had been the genius of the Palestinian national movement between 1967 and 2000, or who knows what the last date was? It was to hold all this plurality together at the cost and at the price of huge concessions and compromises that it held the West Bank and Gaza, different families, Marxists, communists, nationalists, secularists, Islamists, you name it. Tribes, refugees, diaspora, those living in the inside. All of it was held together through a movement, through a man, Yasser Arafat, and through an ideology that made room for all these ambiguities and all these paradoxes. That's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, and I think part of the strength and weakness of the Palestinian national movement over the last 40 years has been that ability to keep contradictions together. Violence, but also non-violence. A state, but also national liberation movement. An indigenous movement, but also a movement that drew on the diaspora. A left-wing movement that had a lot of echo in the revolutionary movements of the Third Worldist era in the 60s and 70s, but also a movement that had traits of a more modern entity that was trying to dialogue with the United States, with Israel. And of course, the Oslo Accords are the biggest paradox and ambiguity and irony of all, because when have you heard, on the one hand, of a national liberation movement that says we're going to forsake violence and start building state institutions, even while the vast majority of our land is still under occupation? I don't know of any other. Now, by the same token, I don't know of many countries like Israel that said we're going to sit down and talk to our opponents, even though they may not have given up on some goals that we consider to be inherently hostile to our own interests. But from the Palestinian perspective, and looking at it from their eyes, it really was a huge step that some may criticize, to say we're going to give up the one instrument, the one point of leverage we had, which is the use of violence, and we're going to start talking to the Israelis, and we're going to start building institutions, even while the occupation over the vast majority of our people and land continues. Now that set a contradiction at the heart of the Palestinian national movement, which again, I think because of what Fatah was and the PLO was and Arafat was, perhaps over and beyond everything else, they were able to manage. One foot in national liberation, one foot in state building, one foot in the aura of a guerrilla movement, and the other foot in the White House, where President Clinton and I had the opportunity to meet with Yasser Arafat, perhaps, I think, more often than President Clinton, maybe of any other leader. All those contradictions were straddled. And yet what's happened today? What's happened today is that those contradictions, those paradoxes, those ambiguities, which made the richness and the strength of the Palestinian national movement, have now been, or being its undoing. You now have the geographic spread between Gaza and the West Bank, which I'm sure Sarah will talk to us about in great detail, which is greater than at any time over the last few decades. You have divisions between families and clans, again, something you see mainly in Gaza, but I suspect that we're seeing the same thing in the West Bank as well. You see personality clashes, and above all, of course, you see the clash, the tragic clash, the one that I think for those of you and us who've been observing the Palestinian scene for decades never thought would happen. Palestinians shooting Palestinians, as many Palestinians being killed in the last few weeks by Palestinians as by Israelis, Hamas fighting Fatah and Fatah fighting Hamas. That was unthinkable. But that tells you how thin the layer was that held the Palestinian movement together, and the difference between what it was and what it unfortunately might become. A divided movement that can't keep its core together. And what we've seen over the last year is a division at the core of the movement between Fatah, which claims, which even though it lost the election, still believes it has all power, and Hamas, even though it won a close election, believes it has gained all of it. It's not a battle between two ideologies. Let's not kid ourselves. This is not a fight because Fatah believes in a two-state solution, Hamas doesn't. When's the last time you saw two Palestinians, one from Hamas, one from Fatah, arguing over that point? It's about power. It's about who's going to control the security services, who's going to control the money, who's going to control the PLO, who's going to control the Palestinian Authority. And that's the tragedy. They're fighting over spoils when they don't even have a state to fight over. How could that be? And that's the real challenge today of the Palestinian national movement, is to refine, just to rediscover a sense of national unity so that they're not going around the world arguing one against the other and undoing again what really was Yasser Arafat's great accomplishment, which was to maintain relatively good relations with the major capitals, Arab capitals, European capitals, and the United States, while at the same time preserving the independence of the national Palestinian decision. Today what you have is Palestinians playing with foreigners who are only too glad to play in the Palestinian playground to see who could get more allies in the internal fight. And it really pains me when I see Palestinians coming here, going to Europe, and saying, don't deal with Hamas. There are people who are going to change our society. You know, let's ignore them, let's marginalize them, let's undermine them, and then you can deal with us. I tell them they're really banking on the wrong horse. The outsiders are not going to save Palestine. They need to deal with one another, and they need to answer their own basic questions about what is the ideology, what is the movement, how are they going to live together, how are they going to fight together, what is the form the fighting is going to take. And until and unless they do that, then of course, as I started off by saying, those who view the Palestinian national movement as an adversary, I'm not going to do them any favors. So what's the lesson for you? You didn't come here to hear me talk and pontificate about why the Palestinian national movement is in such a mess. You're here to see what you can do. And there are things, and the first thing you could do is think about this and think about what you as activists in the United States with connections to the Arab world, both because of your origin, you, like myself, have roots in that region of the world, you have contacts, ADC has a huge network here and abroad. What are the things we can do? And let me suggest 4 things. 2 of them you could direct to Palestinians and to Arabs, and 2 that you could direct here in the United States. When you leave here and you go meet whoever you're going to meet in the Arab world, in the Congress, at the grassroots level. To the Palestinians first of all. As I said, I think your message has to be, don't bet on the wrong horse. Don't expect that the United States is going to come in and help you wage your fight for you. Don't expect that the Europeans are going to do the same. Don't expect that the Arabs are going to do the same. When you come here and you say to some, let's fight together against Hamas, arm us against Hamas, give us money against Hamas, you're doing yourselves the biggest disfavor you could do. And I remember, and I think Afif may remember, though he probably won't comment on it, when Arafat was in his waning days, I recall some Palestinians coming here saying, you're right, Arafat was the problem. Let's wait till, let's isolate him, let's wait till he's done, and then you could help us. What help did they get after he was gone? What message do American officials, of which I was one at one point, what do you hear when somebody says that? You don't hear the second part of the sentence, which is, then come help us. You only hear the part that says, oh, some Palestinians don't like Arafat either. So we are probably on the right track when we're trying to isolate him. What do American officials, what do European officials, what do Arab officials hear when people from Fatah come and tell them, Hamas is our enemy too, let's defeat them and then let's come and build a peace process? They don't hear about the peace process, they hear about defeating Hamas. That's not a message that Palestinians should be directing at others. But of course, I'd say the same to Hamas. Hamas should not be playing the foreign card either. They have to find a way. And your message should be, because you know the United States, and you know the United States better than any Palestinian leader will ever know it, your message should be, don't try to play internal Palestinian politics in Washington, and any more than Washington should play internal Palestinian politics. Your second message to the Palestinians should be, what do you stand for? I was struck this morning, I read the Washington Post, as those of you who got up early enough before coming here may have done, and there's an article about how Hollywood stars are getting active on behalf of international causes, Darfur, the Congo, Uganda. It's a great thing. Who's the star who's being active about Palestine or Israeli-Palestinian peace? Forget about Palestine, you don't have to be an advocate for the Palestinians. Who's the Hollywood star who's an advocate for Israeli-Palestinian peace? I could think of a few. It's not Angelina Jolie, it's not Brad Pitt, it's not George Clooney. Why is that? I think there are many reasons. Some that are objective reasons having to do with the scale of the atrocity in both cases, the fact that this is an issue that really is quite poisonous in this capital. But there's something else which has to do with the muddle of the message. What do Palestinians want to do? They have to come together and say, what's their objective? And really, I don't have good answers to this because there's a good case to be made for all kinds of objectives. What's the means that they're going to use to attain those objectives? What do they want their relationship to the outside world to be? Those are basic questions. Again, Arafat was able to cover some of the ambiguities, to cover some of the uncertainties because of who he was, because of how he had been the national movement, and so whatever he was, the national movement had become. It's not the case today. You don't have that kind of leadership, for better or for worse. So what is the national program? Think of the Algerian struggle, think of the Angolans, think of the Mozambicans. They stood for something. They basically had a consensus, and they had a consensus about what the means were. The South Africans at one point gave up on the use of terrorist violence. So too the Palestinians have to make their own decisions. What do they stand for and how do they want to get there? And until they get to that point, again, it's going to be too easy for those who want to depict the Palestinians in the ways that unfortunately they're too often depicted in the Western media to have their day and have their say. So those are the two messages that as you go out and you speak to Palestinians who are going to come here, you speak to Palestinians when you travel to the region, I would say you need to send to them. And then two messages to the United States, because I understand you had, number one, you had some very illustrious people who came here to talk to you. And number two, you're going to go out and speak to members of Congress and become that lobbying force, and be that lobbying force that ADC has grown to be over the years. Two messages. One message is the mirror image of what I was saying earlier, having to do with domestic Palestinian politics. Ask the people you see in the administration and ask the people you're going to see in Congress, have the policies of the last year worked? Are we any closer to any single goal that the United States has set for itself, whether we agree with them or not, which is to strengthen the peace camp, to strengthen Fatah, to undermine Hamas, to strengthen the moderate, to the pragmatic forces, to strengthen Palestinian institutions and to promote a peace process? On any one of those, are we any closer to that goal than a year ago? Are the radicals weaker? Is Fatah about to come back to power? Is a peace process booming? What are we seeing? None of the above. And so the first test of a policy is it working? Is your policy of isolating and boycotting the government and trying to get the Palestinians to turn against it actually doing what you want it to do? It is not. And I send this message here, I send it in Europe. We have there's more residents in Europe than here, but I think at some point people here have to wake up and see that in fact all of the goals that they've set for themselves are moving backwards. I don't know if Palestinians feel closer to Fatah or Hamas today. I can tell you one thing. I think more of them are looking to some other form of activism. Let's look at northern Lebanon and let's look at Gaza and let's think how many people, when they see that Fatah didn't deliver what it was supposed to deliver and Hamas is not delivering them what they did deliver, they're going to go to somebody who's promising them not instant delivery, but delivery in the afterlife or delivery in the long term. The more Al-Qaeda-like jihadist nihilistic ideology. It makes sense that people would be attracted to that if the ideologies of the today, here and now, are not working. And those are the seeds that we're planting today, by not giving the Palestinians any hope and by telling them that, and by promoting one camp against the other. So that's not working. The peace process is not working. We're telling Hamas to take steps to recognize Israel and recognize the two-state solution. Fine. But at the same time, his acts on the ground are taking us further away from the two-state solution than any words that Hamas could possibly pronounce. Is that a rational policy? Is it a rational policy to deinstitutionalize the Palestinian Authority by weakening its institutions, weakening the Palestinian Authority, and again, getting people to rely more on their tribes or their family or their clans? The policy is not working. When a policy is not working, it's the ABC of politics and of diplomacy. You change it. The second message to Americans you're going to see, and this is one that I'm sure you've been already sending, but it needs to be sent with even greater strength and force and conviction, is that this is hurting U.S. interests. That the absence of a peace process, that the absence of U.S. engagement, that over partiality of the U.S., and the U.S. has always been partial to one side, and even when I was working beside President Clinton, we can't hide the fact that there was an alliance with Israel, there was not an alliance with the Palestinians, but even given that, there are ways to be more engaged. There's a way to push the peace process forward. There's a way to do things to try to salvage the two-state solution that President Bush says he believes in. And so the message has to be, it's hurting our credibility, it's hurting our ability to take action in the region on any of the goals that we set for ourselves, and it's producing a new generation of Palestinians and beyond that, of Arabs who are going to hold the U.S. in very low esteem and who are going to be much more open to the ideology and the appeals of other groups. So those are the things that I would say, the two messages to the Palestinians and Arabs, and the two messages to the Americans. Now, one last word of hope. I'm giving my 3-minute sign, and I realize that this is not so much hope, although I think the hope is in that you have clear messages. These are clear things you could say when you have the clarity and the conviction, and I think the correctness of the view. It's much easier to send a message to whoever you're going to speak to. But of course, the best message of hope is this, is you. And look around you, look at this room, it's what time now? It's 11 in the morning on a Sunday. I'm quite amazed that so many of you have made it out here today, and so many of you are going to go in and continue to advocate what you're advocating, and I think you're the best message of hope, at least I've seen in a very long time. So thank you for being here. Healing the rip between Hamas and Fatah, again, I think for those of you who have contacts over there, and I think Afif laid out very, very eloquently what the diaspora and what the American Arab community can do. I think it's a message that you need to send about how harmful what they're doing, and again, as I said, playing playing the U.S. as an actor in the Palestinian drama is never going to help them. As for the outlines of a solution between Israelis and Palestinians, I think Ambassador Safi could give the answer. I think most of us in this room know what a solution would look like if there is going to be a viable and fair solution. We could get into the details, but I don't think that's the mystery anymore.
One last question, because we really run out of time.
My question is for Mr. Malley. You spoke, I think, of the unique genius of the Palestinian national movement from '67 to 2000, was its ability to bring together unique, various ideologies under one roof. And then, on the other hand, you say that at this time you're asking Palestinians to state openly what they stand for. And I'm wondering how you square those two things, the ability to bring various ideologies together under one national movement, and on the other hand, a discrete and definitive understanding of what they stand for and what the means of attaining that are.
All right, so I'm going to turn to the panel now for their last responses.
Can you take one more question?
No, I'm really sorry. We're really out of time, because we need to...
I didn't see the mic go up.
Right, to make a last point. So, Ron?
Okay, well, the last question, which is how could on the one hand say that the Palestinian genius was to play with ambiguity and now say they need clarity? I think it's a very fair question, but the times have changed. I think when you had the leadership you had and the organization you had, the Palestinians were able to straddle these worlds, partly because people thought they knew what they were getting with Arafat, with all his shades and all the gray and all the different colors. I think today, if we're talking about, and I think Afif said it as well as anyone can, if you're talking about rethinking and putting in question and trying to sort out what the new Palestinian message will be and how you could in fact win the political debate, there's going to have to be more clarity, because today there's more questions. They may be pretextual questions, you may find them unfair, but there's real questions going to the core of what the Palestinians want. And Afif again said that some people were talking about a one-state solution, some are talking about a two-state solution. What is it they want? And there's going to be a need for more clarity if the political debate is going to be won. Now, the political debate brings me to the U.S., and again, a very fair point. Is this a battle that can be won? I may not be quite as optimistic as Afif is, but I do think that this is a field that the Palestinians and the Arab Americans cannot abandon. You cannot say that because Congress, for all its reasons, and we know the reasons, is going to take the attitude it takes, is going to vote the resolution it votes, that because of that you're not going to try to address them and to talk to them and to convince them and to persuade them, because that would be giving up the fight before you've even waged it. There's so much to be done, because there's so much wrong information, there's so much misinformation. It's not a battle that's ever going to be won 100%. As I said earlier, I think there's so many reasons that bring the U.S. and Israel together, and I think nobody should try to pretend that that's going to be otherwise. But there's a difference between the policies of this administration and the policies of its predecessor. There's a difference between this President Bush and his father. And at a minimum, I think that with greater activism, with greater public education, with all the steps, again, that Afif described, there's a capacity to bring back the U.S. to a more engaged role, a more positive role, a role that could bring all of us closer to the goals that we want. Thank you.